everybody, it is time for another lesson of Witchcraft Fundamentals. Today we're going to be going over Lesson 10, which is Shadow Work. Now, shadow work is one of those things where a lot of people talk about how important shadow work is, and a lot of those same people cannot then articulate what shadow work actually is. So we're going to talk about what shadow work actually is and how to do it. First, a couple of nice disclaimers. I am not a mental health professional. This is not mental health advice. If you feel like you need mental health advice, I advise you to seek a licensed practitioner in your area. This is a specialized field with a lot of expertise, and I don't have any of it. So yeah. Why do I need that fun disclaimer? Well, shadow work is actually pretty much psychological. So let me give you some definitions so you know what I'm talking about. Other people may use these terms differently, but when I say shadow work, it is the psychological portion of shadow work and any magical practices that are designed to facilitate those psychological processes. And we're going to talk very in depth about what the shadow is and all of that kind of stuff, and what the actual meat and potatoes of shadow work really is, with some concrete steps you can do. There's also shadow magic, which is a different beast. Shadow magic is a set of different magical techniques that involve the shadow, and that can involve the psychological shadow. It can also involve other things. I believe Digitalis has a great, the Shadow Magic Compendium, if you want to read some more stuff about that. It is beyond the scope of this. Yeah. So this lesson is very theoretical. This is all a bunch of stuff that, if you're in the beginning of your practice of witchcraft, you're probably not ready for shadow work. But it's important to know what it is, so that when you do get to that point, you're not going to be like surprised by it, because gosh, so many practitioners are. And we'll talk about the benefits in just a minute. So first, what is the shadow? Pretty fundamental question. Many, many different answers. The way I define the shadow is it's your dark side. Not to say that it's like your evil side. It's not your evil twin, like Ash's evil twin in Army of Darkness. Great movie if you haven't seen it. But it's the parts of yourself that you hide from the world. You can think of it as like the stuff that gets shoved in the back of the junk closet that you pretend aren't there. And it might even be things that we hide from our own conscious minds. It can be things that we don't like about ourselves. So it's things we hide from the world around us, and things we even hide from ourselves about ourselves. That's what the shadow is. It is, it's things that you hide from public view, oftentimes because, the world around you might say those things are bad or wrong or immoral or distasteful. Think of uppity women in the Victorian era. Some of these things are very, social contracty kind of things. Like, you have to take your murderous rage against your neighbor and put that in the shadow, because you can't murder your neighbor, because that's illegal. Social contract stuff. So not everything there are things that are put in the shadow because they belong in the shadow, because we have to get along and live our lives, be around other people. We have to be socially responsible, particularly in this day and age. It also, all of the things that are unacceptable to yourself. This is where it gets real self-helpy. Things like when you're told that you're too bossy or too pushy, or you're too weak, or, boys don't cry, or, girls don't play sports, all that kind of stuff. Don't eat that cake, it'll make you fat. all those things about yourself that you find unacceptable, whether it's external things that have been imposed upon you or things you've internalized. It's whatever about yourself that you shove in the closet and pretend aren't there. Why is that a problem? Well, the benefits of doing shadow work is if you have huge chunks of your psychological, energetic being shoved in a closet, that's power that you don't have access to. If you do shadow work, you make friends, you integrate, you feed shadow, and we'll talk about all those things in a minute. But when you have done shadow work, when you do the process, the never-ending process that is shadow work, you have access to the totality of your energetic being, and you can reach your full potential. You can actually do some really amazing things. The more folks that have a lot of their being stuck in the shadow tend to be brittle. They're folks where they're just not able to deal with stuff as effectively because huge chunks of their ability to cope with things are stuck in the closet under a box. No judgment about that, but if you want to be a practitioner and you want to be the most potent practitioner you can be, you can't leave all your trauma and psychological stuff locked in a closet. It just doesn't work. Energy that flows throughout your being. We've talked about this on a number of lessons, but your aura, your energetic health. If huge chunks are missing, well, that energy's not going to flow real well, and it can only get so potent because there's chunks missing. Unfortunately, that's the way that goes. Another huge benefit of doing shadow work is it actually strengthens your aura. It heals the cracks and bruises and soft spots in your energetic body, and it makes you less vulnerable to negative energies, whether it's psychic attack, a negative entity, or just walking through the miasma of someone else's bad day. If you have a strong aura, a strong, well-grounded, centered, energetic being with an integrated shadow, you're kind of untouchable. Like, it's really, really difficult to get a finger hold into the energetic body of someone who's really accomplished at shadow work. So particularly if you think you're in a situation where psychic defense is super important, you have to do the hard work. Further, when you've done all this shadow work, when you've healed up your energetic being, you have an incredibly stable and strong foundation for doing any type of magical working. And, we've talked before when we talked about grounding and centering way back in lesson 3 from Metaphysical Hygiene. Or was that lesson 2? That one's lesson 2. Lesson 2, Metaphysical Hygiene. If you haven't watched it yet, go watch that. This is not going to work for you if you have not got a grounding in Metaphysical Hygiene. This is like Metaphysical Hygiene on steroids. Yes, watch lesson 2. Watch all the lessons, then come back. But if you wanted your magic to be the best it can be, to do the most for you, to serve your will, you need to be a stable platform for that magic. Kind of as simple as that. Risks of ignoring the shadow. Just as a strong, integrated shadow and an examined, fed, happy shadow is a stable platform, a fractured shadow is an unstable platform for performing magic. You're going to have things go wrong. You're going to have unintended consequences. You're going to have unclear intent. Your subconscious mind will start to sabotage you. Folks with trauma, you've probably already noticed places where you sabotage yourself because your trauma is shouting in the back of your head. That's a part of the shadow. Really fractured shadows can also attract negative entities. Just like a strong, healthy aura is your best line of defense against negative energy, a weak, fractured, chunks missing, damaged aura with huge chunks out of your shadow stuck in a closet, that's super vulnerable. You become the low-hanging fruit for negative magical things. It's not a good place to be. It's just not. These things are not that common, but if you're going to be a practitioner, you're going to attract things. Don't be low-hanging fruit. Now, that's not to say that shadow work is all hugs and puppies. It's not. There are some risks to doing shadow work, which is why I'm not saying you need to do it right now. Just that you need to know what it is and what it looks like. Doing shadow work is literally confronting the bits of yourself you find unacceptable. It's all the stuff you don't like about yourself, all the things people have told you are bad. That's psychologically difficult. It's exhausting, it's challenging, it can make you unbalanced, it can be just god-awful. It's the whole dark night of the soul thing. It can be very depressing. It's very, very difficult. If you're doing shadow work and it's not emotionally challenging, I would question whether you're actually doing shadow work or if you're just pantomiming, because it hurts. It just does. There is also a risk, particularly if you're trying to do a lot of shadow work by yourself. If you don't have support, if you don't have, for a lot of folks, you need to actually have like a therapist or a counselor or a licensed mental health professional to help you with some of this stuff, depending on what you've been through. I don't know you. I don't know what your needs are, but gosh, it helps. I had a therapist when I was doing my most intensive shadow work, and it was invaluable for me. So, make your own choices, but I really have support. Have support, or this will go poorly for you. But if you don't have the right support, if you don't have strong support, you can get lost in the shadow. It's kind of like a downward spiral. When you look at bad things, it might put you in a bad mood, which then attracts bad things, which then makes you look at worse things, and don't be your own worst enemy. But it is a thing that can happen. It's just one of the risks. There's a reason that mental health is a whole thing where you get PhDs, because it's challenging and complicated, and people are complicated and individual. There is no universal advice I can give here for what you need to do in order to be ready for shadow work, or for you to do it safely, because I don't know you. It has to be individual. So I really, really recommend, really, 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 have access, at the very least, to some form of mental health support that is not just your best friend. Depending on what your circumstances like, that can be out of your reach. We all live in very different circumstances. With the kind of the Zoom era that we live in, there's things like BetterHelp and Talkspace, online counseling, that are really quite affordable, very, very accessible. You can just text folks. It doesn't have to be, going to a big office where a dude in a cardigan judges you. But you do you. Make your own choices about how you want to do this. But if you're thinking about doing shadow work, make sure there's somebody who is willing to support you and also able to support you. Your best friend might be amazing, but if they're also an emotional wreck, they can only be so supportive. They don't have the spoons to give you. That's where a professional, super helpful. You're paying them money. They are required to give you spoons. That's what they're for. Get off my mental health soapbox. Shadow work is mental health. It's a thing. So, now that you know what the shadow is, let's talk about a little bit more kind of in-depth of metaphysically what is the shadow. So, once again, this is my understanding of it, but I think of the shadow as kind of, remember in Peter Pan, his shadow that had to be like sewed back on his foot because his shadow kept escaping and it's kind of rude and like pulled on Wendy's hair. That's a little bit like what the metaphysical shadow kind of is. It's an energy, it's a dense, heavy energy, and it is attached to you. You know, where it lies, whether it's on another plane of existence, whether it's deep within your auric bodies, I don't know. I don't know. But it is a dense energy that is attached to you, and it is something that weighs you down. Like I said, that doesn't mean it's evil, doesn't mean it's bad, doesn't mean you should have no shadow. We all have shadows, and we will all always have shadows, unless you ascend to like bodhisattva level, and I think even then, they still have to get along with other people. Yeah. So, as a magical practitioner, the first thing you do when you start to think about shadow work is you need to assess your own shadow. The first thing that I look at is the density of a shadow. So what I mean by that, you know, we all process things differently. We all are more or less sensitive. We'll take certain things to heart. Other things will just run off and not stick to us. We're all vulnerable to different things. And we're all emotional and damaged to different extents. So folks that hang on to trauma and negative experiences and tend to wallow in that, we have dense shadows. Real thick. You can think of it almost like tar. It hangs onto things. It gets all over things. It's very unpleasant. And then there's folks that just are naturally happy and optimistic. I have no idea what that would be like. But they have very diffuse shadows. It's very kind of light and cottony. And it's there because nobody's perfect. But it's not a hindrance to them. The goal of shadow work is the diffuse shadow. It's there, but it's not a hindrance to your life. That's the goal of shadow work. You know, you have access to all of your energies, you have a stable platform, you have a strong, healthy aura. It's as good as it can be while doing the constant work, because life is always adding new things to the shadow as you process them out the other side, and it's a continuous cycle. Goes on forever. Very much an Ouroboros of terrible things. So, yeah. First thing you need to do is assess kind of how dense is your shadow. How problematic is the shadow in your life? If you're the kind of person that is super pessimistic and dark and kind of dreary, and me, you know it. You know if you're a negative Nelly. I'm a negative Nelly. The shadow is my burden. It's large. But you have to look at kind of, it lets you know how much work you have to do and how much focus you should give it. If you're really quite happy and you're okay and your aura is strong and you feel very stable, maybe you don't need to do a huge amount of shadow work. Maybe you can just kind of do the initial kind of assessments and do a little, soul searching and reflection, and you'll be good. That would be amazing. I have no idea what that's like, but it'd be great. But it's important to be realistic about shadow work. If you know that you've got trauma, you hang on to negative stuff, if you're predisposed to bitterness, hi, then you've got a slightly larger hill to tame. The metaphor is murky. But you're going to have more work to do than someone who's super happy-go-lucky. Probably. Maybe, unless they're just hiding something terrible from themselves. I don't know. So yeah, your density is based on kind of how much you're aware of what's going on in your own negative space, and how hard you've repressed it. If you've shoved something in a chest and put a lock on it and a chain and dumped it into concrete and chucked it into a swamp, you're gonna have some work dealing with that thing that you tossed mob style into the alligator infested swamp. So once you've thought about how much work you have to do, don't get too depressed. It's okay. Like I said, this is lifetime work. This is not something that you're gonna like spend a weekend, personal retreat on and be done with shadow work forever. It's not how that works. Because the mind is constantly changing. The energy, constantly changing, growing, evolving, being affected by the things around you. Just the way it works. So the next step is identifying specific aspects of your shadow. When I talk about, if you've got like chunks pulled out of your aura and shoved in a closet, it's identifying what the chunk represents. What is the thing that you're hiding from others or from yourself? Some things you'll know because you're aware that you've shoved it in the closet. Other things you've probably internalized in such a way that you deny that it was ever there in the first place. Everyone wants to be a good person. Everybody wants to be liked. Everyone wants to fit in. That's how societies have cohesion. But everyone's got static. We've all got things we do that don't really work out when it comes to playing nicely with others. They get stuck in the shadow. So the first thing that I do is reflect on things that trigger you and things where you have a disproportionate emotional reaction to things. If you don't know what triggers are, I have to wonder, have you truly been on YouTube? But triggers are things that you experience in the wilds of life, that have a kind of a snap, knee-jerk reaction connection to some prior negative thing that has happened. And, it ranges from like a full like PTSD flashback to the, oh, that joke reminds me of the, playground taunt that haunted me all the way through elementary school. And it's not necessarily that whatever has triggered you is deliberate or malevolent or anything like that, Example, I'm a hiker. I once had a very, very negative experience on Mount St. Helens where I was walking across a slope that was covered in snow. And on the walk over, it was early in the morning and everything was frozen. The walk back, the sun had come out. And the slope collapsed underneath me. And I fell about 40 feet down a scree field. That's uncomfortable. But now whenever I have that kind of a bottom falling out sensation, or if I'm not like sure if I'm on stable ground, I can trigger back to that experience, even though whatever I'm actually dealing with might have nothing to do with it. There's no actual danger, but my whole nervous system will light up like I'm in physical danger. That's the kind of things that are triggers. And it's not all physical, it can be very psychological. If somebody said something super negative and hurtful to you, and then 4 years later someone says something that reminds you of it, it might psychologically trigger you back into that really negative space. You are very likely to have shadow work to do around trigger stuff. And a lot of that is very much you should really consult with a mental health professional dealing with psychological triggers, because you can do yourself some mental harm blundering around with that stuff. Not an expert, can't give you great advice on that. But if you want to know what's in your shadow, look at your triggers. Places where, if somebody makes a bad joke, and instead of going, ah ha ha, you're an asshole, you burst out crying, that's a disproportionate reaction. It does not mean it's an invalid reaction, but it's not proportionate to what you've just experienced. That is probably linked to something that you've put in your shadow. Reflect on intrusive thoughts. These are also one of those, these are important psychological things that I do not have expertise in. But places where you have intrusive thoughts, the worries that bubble up when you're trying to fall asleep at night, the the weird moments where you're in a meeting with your boss's boss and you want to just stand up and swear. It's not a helpful urge. No, it's not productive. But that often means there's something that you're not paying attention to bubbling in the back of your psyche going, hey, hi. And then bad things happen. And then you also look at the things that you know that you minimize about yourself. I'm very bossy. Shocking, I know. I'm very bossy, and I got a lot of flack for it as a child. Turns out when you're a 5-foot tall woman and you take charge of literally everything, not everyone's a big fan. So making sure that I'm considerate and not bossing people around to the detriment of their own agency, that's a thing I have to pay attention to. And so that's a trait about myself that I deliberately will minimize. It's not necessarily it's the worst thing in the world. There's plenty of opportunities and circumstances where people literally shove, respond, you're good at organizing things, take care of it. It's how I became an accidental project manager. Good at it. The things that you deliberately minimize about yourself, things like road rage. You know that it's not helpful. You know that it's maybe not rational. And so you try, particularly if you've got your mom in the car, or maybe that date you're trying to impress, you will minimize these certain behavioral traits so that they think you're cool. And when you're kind of rooting around with this stuff, a good way to kind of think about it is that terrible project management trope of asking the 5 whys. Oh, I've been triggered by a thing. Why? Oh, because it reminds me of this. Why is that triggering? Oh, because it made me feel like blah, blah, blah. Okay, why did you feel that way? And you keep asking yourself why till you find this black nugget of coal that is the shadow trait. it's usually just not that straightforward, particularly if you haven't done a lot of shadow reflection, personal reflection. Journaling is a great mechanism for kind of dealing with getting this stuff out of the back of your brain and into the front where you can actually do something about it. So, yeah, I do actually really recommend journal reflections on this kind of stuff because it's very ephemeral, it's very slippery, and it lives in the shadow. You might look at it and then it will scurry back into the shadow and you'll forget. Not the most helpful. But yeah, so reflect on the things that you have disproportionate reactions to, things that are intrusive thoughts, and things that you consciously minimize. That's so you can identify what is in your shadow. Now, once you've identified a few things that are in your shadow, do not belabor yourself. Do not try to find all the things. Find a good three or four, and start there. You cannot undo a lifetime of shadow building in one instance. You will go crazy. Pardon. So you need to work on small steps, identify a few things, then you can work on integration. So the goal of doing shadow work is to integrate the shadow so that it's not in the closet, it's just maybe in your handbag, in your man purse, your satchel, your backpack, whatever carrying item you actually carry, fanny pack, I don't know. But it's on you, and you have access to it should you need it. Like if you're doing magic and you want all of you present. That's the goal of doing shadow work. Some sources will call it integrating the shadow. Some will call it eating the shadow. But that's the real end goal. And what that actually means, if you're familiar with that kind of old trope, there used to be movies about like multiple personality disorder, which I believe is currently actually called dissociative identity disorder. Not a psychologist, not up with all the current terms. This is just what I'm remembering. But there's a trope from some like movies in the 70s about this sort of thing where someone will have had some terrible negative experience and fractured into, multiple people. And they must learn to love and accept one another in all their faults, and then they integrate and become one psychologically traumatized individual, but one rather than a bunch of separates. That's kind of what integrating the shadow is all about. You have to be fully aware of whatever the trait is that got stuck in your shadow. What is that lump of coal that you found when you asked yourself all those whys? And you have to accept that that's a part of yourself. And that is much, much more difficult than it sounds. Because it usually means not only do you have to accept that there's this thing about you that you don't really like, but that it's a part of you and it's allowed to be there. You have to forgive yourself not only for having that trait that you don't like, but also forgive yourself for shoving it in the shadow in the first place and keeping it there. Psychological work is difficult. It's extremely, extremely difficult. That's where it often requires making multiple passes, little baby steps, have some professional support. Traditional soul retrieval, shamanic soul retrieval, is kind of a form of integration of the shadow. There's more to it than that, depending on the traditions, but okay, there's always more to it than that. But more or less depending on the traditions. So if you have access to reliable, trusted shamanic practitioners, this is something that many of them do offer as a service, is soul retrieval practices. it's something to look into if you think it would be helpful for you. If you need, spiritual help integrating some of this stuff or retrieving, maybe you're having trouble, figuring out what a thing in the shadow is. Soul retrieval processes can actually help with some of that. Different practitioners are good at different things. Make sure you get someone that has recommendations that you can follow up on, because this is very important work. And vet your practitioners. So that's big, scary work. Integrating the shadow is big, scary, end goal kind of work. Most of us do not actually have the spoons on the regular to do that level of work. I have a job, I have a house, I have cats. You can see one of them sleeping on the love seat. I have responsibilities. I have things I have to do. I cannot emotionally incapacitate myself for 4 days while I deal with that terrible thing that happened in 4th grade. I just don't. So instead of integrating, trying to do things all at once, you can actually feed the shadow. And this is a little bit more like a pressure release valve. And the goal is to balance honoring all aspects of ourselves with our need to actually function in society. As Hobbes has pointed out, I studied a lot of philosophy. I had to read The Republic and Leviathan multiple times. Thomas Hobbes talks about we have a social contract. Because we all have to live in a society with other people, no person is an island, there are certain rules we have to follow to get along with one another. Like stand in line in the grocery store, or, don't park in the handicap space if you are not someone who is, differently abled. Whatever, apologies for terminology, I'm still learning. But yeah, so we all, we don't break into one another's houses. We don't murder one another. These are all social contract. We have to live together, so we need these bare rules kind of things. That's where feeding the shadow comes in, is we can't, as I said earlier, you can't dissolve your shadow, because we cannot just run wild and feral through the world. That's not super helpful for making your life and your world a better place. Being socially responsible is actually important to both enhance your own life and the lives of those around you. Hopefully these are one and the same thing, because you care about the people around you, and by making the community better, you're actually making your own life better and yourself happier. I hope. Altruism's a thing. It's a good thing. Have empathy for other people. So feeding the shadow. Back to the topic at hand. So, ways of feeding the shadow. Like I said, this is basically your metaphysical psychic pressure release valve, like on a water heater. It makes sure that it doesn't explode by letting off little small bites of dealing with the shadow. You can find safe and relatively mentally healthy ways to allow a shadow trait to be out into the open with kind of established boundaries set. For example, I listen to dark, screamy, loud music. Lots of it. Lots of Nine Inch Nails. It's very, very dark and not things that I can express in a socially acceptable way in pretty much any other way. But that allows that dark and kind of violent and mean part of me to express itself in a safe and socially acceptable manner, and then go back in the box so that I can then work at my wonderful nonprofit and care about others. Things like doing sports and exercise is also a great way where you can get a lot of aggression and negative energy. You can kind of, and, you know, whether it's running or boxing or mountain climbing, whatever it is that you do physically that lets you just get energy out, that can be an exercise of feeding the shadow. You do have to do it deliberately, you know, actually bring up those energies and let the physical burning of energy burn those energies and let it do its thing a bit. Creating art. I know people that, you know, write poetry or paint. People that do this like Zen coloring booky kind of thing, but you can, whatever it is about you that needs to express itself, art is a really good way of letting things that are not normally socially acceptable out, and it's okay. You know, if you've got a sketchbook that's just got energetic vitriol on every page, and that's how you get it out, great. That's a really safe and socially acceptable and mentally healthy way to deal with those things. You know, you're not denying them. You're letting them out, but you're not hurting yourself or anybody else. Win-win. Ritual can also be a great way of dealing with the shadow. Doing actual like rituals for catharsis. Do the whole magical thing. Create sacred space. Call in metaphysical allies to hold that space. If you have fellow practitioners, they can also help hold the space. And you can, you know, create a grounding circle and just let all that energy out in that safe space so that it can be grounded and won't hurt anybody. You know, and if that means, you know, talking to certain metaphysical allies or deities or having a screaming match with your asshole dad that died of alcohol poisoning, literally summon his ghost and scream at him. That's what you need to do. That could be problematic in a number of ways, but everybody's different. We all have different needs and different abilities. Who am I to judge? Some people can actually do shadow work via meditation, and, you know, very successfully release some of their negative stuff and feed those shadows via meditation. It's not something I'm particularly good at. I tend to go with the whole listening to music or journaling. Usually, actually, there's lots of journaling for me because I'm very word heavy, you may have noticed. But those are all things you can do basically as a pressure release valve to let your shadow out, to feed it, to acknowledge it. And it's the intermediate step between kind of identifying it and actually integrating it. For most folks that I know that do shadow work on the regular, you've got to feed a particular shadow trait for a while, and then it will just naturally begin to integrate. There's no hard fast, if you do X, Y, Z, then you will integrate within, you know, this specific time frame. That's not how that works. This stuff is way, way too individual. It depends on so many things. And sometimes there's going to be aspects of your shadow you are never going to integrate. You know, whether it's, you know, some trauma that was imposed upon you, some societal thing, you know, maybe you've got generational guilt. There's all kinds of stuff that people deal with, you know. Don't feel like you have to, like, to plow through the stuff and become one with your shadow. It doesn't work that way. Take your baby steps. One thing to be careful with when you start doing shadow work and you're feeding the shadow, There is a very fine line between feeding the shadow in a healthy and productive way and self-indulgence. You know, acknowledging that I want that piece of cake and that the voice of my many, many female relatives that have told me that if I eat that cake, I'll be fat and therefore bad and therefore evil and not worthy of anything. That's the shadow talking. My feeding the shadow would be acknowledging all of those voices and enjoying my slice of cake. Self-indulgent trauma reaction to that would be shoving the entire cake into my face. I would not actually be happy or feel better after eating that entire cake. I've done it though. It's not actually productive. You know, mindless self-indulgence and just giving over to shadow urges and intrusive thoughts, that's not feeding the shadow. That's generally pretty self-destructive. So self-destruction will not make your life better, therefore it's probably not the path you should choose. We will all do this on occasion. If you slip up, if you indulge, rather than feeding the shadow when you're trying to just deliberately feed the shadow, forgive yourself. We're not perfect. It's okay. You know, if it happens a lot, well then maybe you really do need to talk about that therapist. Someone that will really help you deal with some of that. But if it, you know, every once in a while, you slip up, you overfeed your shadow, you let it run a little feral, well then you just tidy up after it and move on. Because that's life. We are vulnerable beings, we make mistakes. That's why the shadow gets built in the first place. Yeah, please don't allow your shadow work to become part of your shadow. That would be so ironically sad. So yeah, that's integrating and feeding the shadow. It is much more complicated than it sounds. Yeah, I'll have a couple of book recommendations down in the description for the lesson, but it's a big, lifelong kind of project once you really start doing shadow work. If you're a practitioner, eventually, if you want to reach your full potential, you are going to have to do shadow work. There are plenty of people that never really do shadow work. And they can have wonderful, happy lives. Only you know what you need. I can't tell you that. But chances are pretty good at some point this is going to come and smack you in the face. So now you have some tools for when that time comes, when you have your dark night of the magical soul. Identify your shadow, feed your shadow, feel a little bit less crappy about it. Things to keep in mind before you engage in shadow work. You need a certain amount of physical and emotional security and stability to safely engage in shadow work. If you are housing insecure, if you are food insecure, if you are in any type of, physical danger, if you're in an abusive relationship, that's something you need to take care of first. We think about that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That very bottom one is safety. If you don't have the physical safety, there is no way that you're going to have enough psychological safety to do elevated spiritual workings. Yeah. If you are not in the right place, don't do this. It'll still be there later, I promise. You may have piled a few more things in there. But have enough safety and security that you can do this work. And if you feel that you must do this work right now, but you have some aspects of lack of safety, maybe it's time to change something about your life. get yourself a good therapist slash counselor slash mental health professional to support you as you do this, because it's hard. It's very difficult. The emotional support system. A couple things to keep in mind. Emotional support can be blood family, it can be chosen family, it can be your friends, it can be your pets, it can be metaphysical allies, it can be groups online, it can be a number of different things. Like, it doesn't mean you have to have like a calming circle of like-minded individuals to hold your hand through your journey. Though, gosh, that'd be kind of nice. But just, you need to have something in your life that can hold space for you while you freak out. That's really what it comes down to. Something that can handle you having a negative emotional moment multiple times. One of the most important things about that is to be honest with those folks in your life. If you're going to start doing a bunch of difficult emotional work, do tell your housemates, your partner, your best friend that you're absolutely going to come cry on. Let them know what you're doing and get their consent before you like emotionally vomit all over them. You know, in order to be a good, supportive friend, to be an ally, you have to be in a certain place yourself. If you just like walk into your partner's, you know, workspace and then just start emotionally vomiting on them and they're in the middle of doing something else, that's not helping either of you. That's a whole lot of making things worse. You know, if you're having a moment, say, hey, I'm having a moment. Can I vent on you for a few? You know, or it is time for a cuddle. Let us all have a cuddle now. Make sure that you have consent, because, you know, when you're, all those videos on the airplanes, you know, secure your own mask before securing the mask on the child next to you. In this case, you are the child. Make sure the adults, your designated support person, is in a place where they can actually be supportive to you and is willing to do so. I pity the household where multiple people do this at the same time. It would just be terrible. Yeah. Emotional work is hard. But the good news is, once you kind of learn how to do this, after some practice, some time feeding, maybe you've integrated a few things, it will just become a part of your reality. And it's not that it will ever be sunshine and roses, but it will suck considerably less once you get used to it. Like I do a lot of, you know, journaling with soothing herbal teas and a nice beeswax candle. I find that very helpful when I'm dealing with shadow stuff. Yeah. So, yeah. For this one, there is no real homework. Just, you know, think about these things. Think about what you might have in your shadow, how you might consider approaching this type of work. You don't have to do it now. Like I said, you have to be in the right place or it will do more harm than good. But you can be aware of it right at the beginning. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. My email's down below. Yeah, and I will see you in the next lesson, which is cemetery work, which is one of my very, very favorites. So yeah, talk to you later. Bye.